we could begin, Ms. Trammell, by talking about what you remember as a little girl. Anything, is anything?
I remember more when I was a little girl than I can remember now.
That is Naomi Sizemore Trammell. She was interviewed on March 25th of 1980. She was 93 years old. Naomi Trammell is going to tell us the story of the textile era in Greer.
You remember living out on the farm?
Oh, yes, sir. Ride horses, go and call the cows, do all kind of things. Climb trees and get a whipping for it.
Did your parents, did they own the farm?
Yes, sir. Yeah, raised cotton, corn, and tobacco, and peanuts, anything, you know, he needed. Some kind of bad fever went around. People, a good many of them died around, you know. Of course, I was just a child, you know. And I'd never known much about anybody dying. Pa died 1 week before my mother did. And and Maud was really sick. She was down with the fever. That sister of mine that died. Well, and him and my sister died. Word Marcia bed, she's died of a heart attack the next week. So they all died in 3 weeks. There was a casket come to our house for 3 Sundays straight. And they all looked just alike. I can remember how it worried me and scared me. I was scared. They divided us children up among my aunts and uncle. That's when we was all separated. But Alma, my oldest sister, she was 16 when they died. Well, she was old enough to come to the mill and work and take care of me, so she come and got me and brought me to the mill. Well, see, we had no home. Well, when I worked in the mill. I worked in the Victor mill. When I was a child, I mean.
When Naomi was 8 years old, 2 years earlier, Victor Mill had just opened for business about a mile from her family home, from the farm. Backed and built by a group of Greer businessmen, Victor was Greer's first weaving mill. The first president, W. Burgess, Will Burgess, named the mill after his 2-year-old son, Victor. A few years later, Burgess opened Franklin Mill just a couple blocks away where the CPW headquarters is now. And a few years after that, this mill, Greer Mill, was opened. It's interesting, Greer Mill was very roughly, half the size of Victor Mill, and Franklin Mill was half the size of Greer Mill. All of Greer's textile mills started their operations using the standard practices of the time, and that meant children. In every American textile factory, children were a substantial part of the workforce. In this area, they were 25% of the workforce. Naomi, at age 10, was certainly not the only child working at Victor Mill, nor was she the youngest.
There were lots of other children your age.
Oh, yeah, a lot of them. It's a lot of them. Especially in the spinning room. That's where they put the children. You could run a frame, or you couldn't run, a child couldn't run nothing else. Really, I had to crawl up on the frame, you've seen spinning frame. Well, I had to crawl up on that to put my what you call, roping in, you know. Because I wasn't tall enough. Because I never was much big, you know. But then a little spinning thing. And I couldn't reach up there to put my roping in. I'd have to crawl up on that frame down there and freak in. I wasn't the only one. There's all over the place like that. Yeah, they're girls mostly. No, it's mostly children. I mean, not big enough to spin. And they had mothers and daddies. They wasn't no better off than I was. The only worry was that my parents was gone. I just grieved all the time about that. I'd heard the girls, you know, talking about Mama done this, Mama done that, and it just broke my heart. Because I didn't have none.
Was child labor terrible? Of course it was. But here's the question I found myself asking over and over. Terrible compared to what? Compared to a Charles Dickens orphanage? Compared to living on the street? Compared to starving on a farm with no parents, maybe with a distant uncle you've never met, maybe becoming a bit of slave labor on that farm, maybe worse than that. That was the story for a lot of orphans. Naomi had 6 siblings that went that route. One of them she never heard from again, and I couldn't find a trace of. Her 16-year-old sister, Alma, certainly knew what the alternatives were, and that young teen, think of a 16-year-old girl, walking up to the door of Victor Mill and knocking on the door and asking for a job. And then going and finding a family in the community that would sublet a room to her so she could get even cheaper housing. And then going and claiming responsibility for her little sister, Naomi. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but possibly saving her life. For Naomi and Alma, a mill job meant security. It meant food and a house and warmth and clothes. And listen, that doesn't make child labor good. What that does, it means that being a child with no parents in 1887 is a hard place to be. But here's where Naomi might surprise you. Because when you hear 10-year-old orphan working in the mill, you expect one kind of a story. But listen to her. When Naomi talks about being a child in the mill, she didn't talk about hardship or suffering or exploitation or abuse. She talked about playing.
Well, we worked longer then in the mill than they do now and made less too. But we didn't work hard. I done all my playing in the mill. That's right. But we played a lot when we worked in the classroom. When we catch up, you see. Well, he didn't care for us going out there and sitting down, you know. All we had to do was just run back up steps and go in and go to work. I remember after I was grown, now they had in the classroom, we played in that classroom, but they had it upstairs where they kept all the cloth, you know, and they had a chute come down, you know. And when the boss man loaded breakfast, we'd play all the time he's gone. They had, you know, they had samples of cloth, little remnants, you know, little things about that wide done up in bones, you know. We get one, sit on them, and slide down that thing. Us grown. Well, I enjoyed it to death. A peg-legged boy called Peg-legged Willis, you know, he worked upstairs in the card room. And he's deviling us girls, you know. He's just a young boy, but he had a peg leg. And he showed that. We'd sit down in circles, you know, and then when it got the cloth for us ready for us to work again, we'll rush our boss man and whistle for us to come in, you know. He'd let us go out and sit on the grass. And he just splattered that water all over us. And we run up there, you know, and we run that peg leg all over that place up there. Just a fly. We couldn't catch him to save our life. He went in the man's bathroom to get away from us. But now he outrun us with a peg leg. We had more fun. We enjoyed it. They wouldn't say nothing to us, just so our frame was going and there wasn't nothing wrong. Well, they wouldn't say nothing to us. It was really good to us.
I adore this woman's spirit. But they was really good to us. I need to tell you something that will help you understand why her experience was different from what you might expect, and quite frankly, was different from the stories of hundreds of thousands of other mill workers. You see, at the exact same time the 10-year-old Naomi climbed up on her first spinning frame, something was happening at Victor Mill that would change everything. You see, from the very first day, Victor Mill they didn't have enough capital. They were low on operating funds. They were in financial strain from the day the door opened. Working hard to figure it out, President Will Burgess and other leaders met with a young attorney down in Greenville. His name was Lewis Parker. Lewis was sharp. He was full of ideas and solutions. They were really impressed. And so they kept talking, and 2 years after the mill opened, the same year Naomi arrived, President Will Burgess asked attorney Lewis Parker if he would take the reins. And Burgess stepped down, and Parker took control of Victor Mill. Now, he had never worked in a mill. He knew very little about how they operated. But he was a financial genius. In fact, he helped found the Bank of Greer and was the Bank of Greer's first president. He quickly worked magic. He got Victor Mill operating in great shape. He actually very quickly got a large new expansion built, which is what's in this picture. I don't know of a picture of the original Victor Mill by itself. And he turned it around. While his financial acumen was really sharp, there was something even greater about Lewis Parker. He was an outspoken Christian who walked what he talked. He loved people. He longed to make their lives better. He was really deeply troubled by the working conditions of mill workers. And now he found himself operating a mill. He could change it. He did a lot of things, like he introduced a plan to self-finance the purchase of homes for his workers. Other mill leaders pushed back on him hard. And they said, if you do that, aren't you going to lose control of your labor force? And Lewis responded, I cannot consider that, because home ownership makes for good citizenship, and I'm concerned for that first of all. Lewis Parker brought in his cousin, Thomas Parker, who shared and actually probably surpassed his concern for the welfare of mill workers. They both believed that they could improve the lives of thousands of people. rather than making them worse. Lewis and Thomas started a second mill in Greenville, Monaghan Mill, and they started a company, Victor Monaghan Company. Lewis operated Victor Mill, and Thomas operated Monaghan Mill, and these two became the test beds for a radically different way of running mills. But the Parker cousins had a really, really difficult task ahead of them. There were a lot of problems in the mills, far more than just children workers.
The one time a man brought a little boy up there. And I don't know, I didn't know what retarded meant, but I always believed that child was retarded. Well, you know up there where the thing, that runs the machine, well, it's got a cap over it. Well, you can raise that cap up and look on there. Well, that little boy was standing there, he raised that cup up, stuck his finger in there and cut it off. And that little boy, he didn't know what he's doing or nothing. And since I didn't know what retarded meant at that time, but since I got grown, I know nearly that child was retarded. And they put him in the mill, his daddy did. That was awful. I thought about that little boy so much. Just whacked his finger off.
That story breaks my heart every time I hear it. A disabled child put into the mill by his father, I assume a family desperate for income, and working around dangerous machinery with no guards and no safety protocols and no supervision. And Naomi thought about that boy the rest of her life. Injuries like this happened in mills across the country. Children and adults lost fingers and arms and legs, and not infrequently their lives. At Victor Mill, just as one example, a boiler room wall fell in and collapsed the fireman. Another one was cutting a hole in the ceiling above him when heavy bags collapsed in and crushed him. But I have to ask, what was he thinking, cutting a hole in the ceiling above him? Like, did he think the floor was going to float away or something? I can't laugh because he died. But maybe you should have thought about that twice. OSHA did not exist yet. Safety regulations were not a thing. And the pressure to keep production up was just intense. And then there was another killer in the mill, tuberculosis.
The most people die in that Victor Mill was what they call galloping TB. They come out, and they'd be wet, just wet all over. It's the hot, and they'd just give them TB. I don't know if the people didn't die. I went to the weave room one time. They let me go to the weave room so I'd make $1 a day, and I like to cook galloping TB. People are dying around with it, Maynard's Blatney's the finest looking thing, and Hub Gaston, young men worked in there. And they didn't live no time after they took that. And that doctor told me, said, now, when he doctored me about 2 weeks, he said, now, young lady, said, you can go back to the cloth room and live, or you can go back to the weave room and die, whichever you want to do. So I went back to the cloth room.
But it was just happening in the weave.
In the weave room, just the people woke, and he said that's what had happened to me if I went back. So I didn't go back.
Countless people, mostly women, were dying in weave rooms across the country, and at much higher rates than in the rest of the mill. You heard Naomi say that she thought it was because of the immense heat, and they would get soaking wet in sweat, and that's what gave them TB. But that was not the case. Actually, the whole mill was hot and sweaty. No, there was something else going on, and doctors frantically tried to find a reason, and a doctor up in New England Mill noticed something. He noticed that in the weave rooms, there was a shuttle in the loom. This is a shuttle, they called them a boat shuttle, and this has a bobbin of thread on it, and this bobbin of thread would zoom back and forth inside the loom, taking the weft thread through the warp, back and forth, and this bobbin is constantly unwinding. And when it gets emptied out, a lady or a man would take this bobbin out and put a fresh one in, and she has to feed the string through a tiny hole right here. And they figured out that the easiest way to do that was to hold it to their mouth and suck in like a straw. And the thread would pop through, and they'd put it back in the loom, and it would go zooming back and forth until it ran out of thread again. And now what would happen? Another person would come along and pull a new thread through, and tuberculosis was passing lips to shuttle to lips to shuttle. They called it the kiss of death. In fact, I found a postcard that has a couple kissing, and it says, "Kissing a person beats kissing a shuttle." That is dark humor. I heard interview after interview from other mills where doctors told workers, "It's okay, it's something else, go back to work." But Victor's doctor realized what was happening, and he warned Naomi to not go back to the weave room. And the mill began changing their practices, and they introduced safety shuttles. But before any of that, there was a Greer doctor looking out for Naomi. And there were so many other problems. What was called starvation wages were not paid here, although pay was really low. Starvation wages and 12-hour workdays, 6 days a week, and squalor housing. And mills across the country and across the world were undeniably terrible places to work. But Greer was beginning to play an outsized role in solving this. It would actually lead the world in fixing this problem, which sounds like ridiculous hubris that our little town could lead, but it did. Now let me walk you through this story. The Parker cousins and these mills, Victor and Monaghan, had by that point bought Greer Mill. Greer Mill was a subsidiary of Victor Mill. So now Victor Mill and Greer Mill and Monaghan Mill start testing and implementing procedures and ideas and plans to make the lives of their workers better. And their hope was that they would spread this out to other mills in the area, and then that would spread out to other mills around the rest of the industry. And some of those Parker cousin innovations seem really odd to us today. For instance, they set aside pasture land and invited their workers to raise cows and pigs there. You see, they recognized that almost all of that first generation of mill worker came from a farm. And raising livestock was in their blood. And it was fulfilling, and it gave them something they could have control over. Here's a picture of Greer Mill. In fact, you're in that picture. Wave at the camera. And this is the Greer Mill village, and you notice behind each house is an outhouse, but you notice the long, low shelter. That is the cow shed, the pig shed. They called it a loafing shed. Believing in the importance of education, they built the first mill schools. They were matching the best schools anywhere. That building is the Victor Mill School. It's magnificent. At Monaghan Mill, they built a YMCA, and at Victor Mill, they built a matching YWCA. It's the picture, it's the building in the right here. These are magnificent structures. Those YWCA building here, it had a number of different facilities and rooms. It had library, first library in the area. It had game rooms. It had meeting rooms. It had a teacher dormitory. Why? Because they discovered they needed more qualified teachers, and they would bring in more educated and qualified teachers. Inside the mill, they demanded that their workers be treated with respect and care, and they trained their managers how to treat their employees well. But at 1914, at the age of 48, Lewis Parker died suddenly of a heart attack out of the blue. And he had spent less than 20 years building his vision. Our mills could have rolled back to what they knew and to what worked everywhere else. But instead, they picked up his vision, and to be honest, his cousin said, "We are going to make this reality with intensity," because his cousin Thomas had bought in with everything he had. And so they didn't abandon it. Okay, Lewis Parker had found his textile start in Greer. He had found his vision for what a mill community could be in Greer. And after his death, it was Greer that picked up his vision and led the way in implementing it and coming up with new ways of doing it. The mill leadership here continued to innovate. The town, they tried out progressive new ideas that people were shocked by. We'll cover some of those. And they were the first to ask, how can we make life better for our employees here? Listen to what Naomi says.
When you first came in there, how did the boss treat you?
Well, they didn't. They didn't bother us all. We were on our side, and that's all of us did. I never had no trouble in my life with no boss.
Would they ever holler at the children or
Why,
try to
no.
push them around? Anything?
No, they sure did. We used to work for Harry Mosey. He was the first boss I worked for in the cloth room, and that cloth room was down on the bottom floor. And come a big snow, and we go out and snowball while he's gone to breakfast, and we hear that door in the weave room. It makes a big noise, you know. And and when we hear that door, we had a good place to go down before we got into the cloth room. Boy, we'd run back in there and go on to our work just like nothing ever happened, and he never know it. He wouldn't care if he had.
I have a hunch he knew. Do you think supervisors hollered at children in mills?
Yeah, I used to go with Banky at Henry Greer. He was a real dancer.
What's his name?
Henry Greer.
Greer.
Henry Greer. And we'd get up a gang, you know, and Garvin settled. He was the manager of the ball team. And he'd get up crowd of girls, and we'd go to that dance.
Now, tell me about how you met your husband.
Well, let's see. I met him. They'd been living there. They'd moved from Mills's Mill to Victor Mill. And I met him at a box supper one night. We used to have box suppers, you know. I met him that way.
Did he bid on your...
Yeah, he bought me a box and asked me for I'd eat with him. You know, they boys would buy a box, you know. They'd have box supper.
Did you make?
And then they'd go and get the girl they wanted, you know, to eat with them.
I've heard it sometimes that the women would make the boxes and the men would bid on them.
Well, the families, you know, had the thing. They'd fix the boxes, you know, and sell them. And these boys would buy them, you know, and then they'd go and get the girl they want to eat with them, you know. And that's where I met him.
What was his name?
Percy Long.
And did he work there in the Greer mill?
Oh, yeah, he worked in the weave room. Yeah, he is a ball player.
A baseball player?
Yeah, he is a professional ball player.
Yeah.
He played professional ball 1 year, 2 years. With it 1 year with the Spinners and 1 year with Anderson. He was a good ball player. But he ruined his arm bowling. He could have made a big league baseball player, but he ruined his arm of bowling. They said the doctor told him that.
Sports were everywhere. Victor Mill had a swimming pool and a gymnasium and basketball tournaments and volleyball leagues and even roller skating contests. This wasn't just a mill, this was a community. But baseball was America's game. And in that sport, Victor Mill was serious about competing at the highest level. And so Joseph Jackson, you might have heard of him as Shoeless Joe Jackson, he started working in a Greenville mill at age 6 or 7. His mom couldn't remember which. He worked 12-hour days as a 6 or 7-year-old. And at age 10, a sickness nearly killed him and left him paralyzed for 2 months. He recovered and got back to his sport, which was baseball. And as a child, he was much better at it than everyone around him. So Victor Mill made him an offer unheard of. They said, if you will come play at Victor Mill on our baseball team, you don't have to work in the mill. Now think about that. A mill, which is built on a business model of cheap labor, is paying a teenage boy just to play baseball. And actually, in a sense, I think that's the Lewis Parker vision in action, you know, investing in people and building community. Joe Jackson played for Victor in 1907, 1 year, and then he was called up to the big leagues. And that is a Greer story. Life was good. Thomas Parker continued work on his cousin's vision. He hired a landscape architect to reshape what were, frankly, ghettos of worker housing and reshape them into beautiful spaces with gardens and parks. Victor Mill has a park, still there, and playgrounds, and at Monaghan, even a cemetery. He hired a full-time gardener whose entire job was to help mill workers with flower gardens and vegetable gardens. And then he donated land for them to put their gardens in and have community gardens. And then in what would prove to be a masterstroke, he hired a man named Dr. Lawrence Hollis. His title was to be Director of Welfare Activities. And this was before the word welfare meant much to anyone. His only request was that Hollis make mill workers' lives better. That was the only instruction he gave him. Hollis was absolutely a genius. He organized innumerable clubs and teams and groups. He aimed at raising the educational level in the schools, at growing community, a sense of belonging. Building character was a big thing to him. Having fun was a huge thing to him. He loved the mill workers, and they loved him. Here are a few things I found heard mill workers say in interviews about Mr. Hollis. I heard one call him a people's person. Another called him a friend of the poor, a community improver, a Christian gentleman. Naomi herself spoke the highest praise of him. It was really jumbled and hard to hear, but what she said was, everyone knew Mr. Hollis and everyone loved him. And that's saying something when he's over thousands and thousands of mill workers across multiple mills. Dr. Hollis took the Parker vision to levels they had never imagined. He started libraries, including the first library in Greenville. He started a technical school to train workers how to do higher paying jobs than mill work. He started an orchestra. He started a 1,000-voice choir. They were pushing people from surviving to human thriving. You see, Naomi, at 10 years old, had unknowingly stepped into a revolutionary progressive experiment. An experiment in whether a mill could make a profit and make workers' lives truly better. Not just for the gain of the mill, but to benefit the people themselves. And that was unheard of at the time. And for the next several decades, that vision would succeed. There was a setback along the way. In 1918, an influenza epidemic swept across the world. They called it the Spanish flu, and it came to Greer.
Well, I must have died with it. I sure did. But now Harry had it pretty bad, but none of the rest of the family didn't have it much. Not enough to hurt. But it killed me. I died with a headache, and my doctor was in service. And an old Dr. Walker came out there to see me. And it didn't give me medicine, or nothing. He'd heal my head. And he told Kate to go in there and heat some boiling water. And she went there and got a pan and heated boiling water. And he said, give him a towel. He went in there and wrung that towel out and come put it on my head. I thought I'd die. He just pushed me down. He wouldn't take it off. I thought he was going to burn me up. And he burnt that pain out of my head. That's what the flu done to me. I remember that well.
It is amazing Naomi survived. And the town survived, and Thomas Parker kept building on the vision. The Roaring Twenties were amazing, and Victor Monaghan continued to innovate. Hollis met a guy named Robert Baden-Powell. He had started this little thing called the Boy Scouts. And Hollis thought we should do that. And he started the first Boy Scout troops in South Carolina at Monaghan Mill, Victor Mill, and Greer Mill. He met a guy named Frank Naismith who had invented this new sport, basketball. I'm getting behind on the slides. And he brought this unknown game back to our mills. And Victor Mill had the first basketball team in the South Carolina mills. And then there was an absolutely endless stream of dinners and parties and performances and productions and plays and picnics. And then there were these festivals, a huge May Day festival every year, not the kind of May Day like the planes going down, and harvest celebrations at the cotton harvest, and Christmas parties like this one. This was the Greer Mill Weave Room employees. These are lint heads, they were called, who normally wore overalls. And they get this sense of dignity in a Christmas party that was held right across the street in the gymnasium. And then they had the most spectacular 4th of July events you can possibly imagine. I am sorry, but our Freedom Blast, as great as it is, does not compare to theirs. Let me tell you, example, what they did. One particular 4th of July celebration, I have the agenda, and it went like this. It started with what they called an Olympic marathon of games. These games included sack races, three-legged races, and climbing a greased pole. And then there was a patriotic address, because this was serious, too. And then there was a giant barbecue feast, everyone eating together out in a field, and the newspaper said there wasn't a chicken left in the county. It didn't specify which county, though. And then there was, of course, baseball, the Victor 9 in this year versus the Poe Mill team. And that year, the whole of Greer turned out to watch the game, not just the Mill Village. But then they had the main event. The main event, and I quote, was a mammoth, colossal, awe-inspiring country circus. Now, I need you to understand, this wasn't just any circus. They had all the regular features, tumblers, acrobats, and chariot racing, okay? But the stars of the show to them were clearly the animals. They had a Gila monster. They had a two-headed elephant. They had a one-legged giraffe. And the star of the show was the blood-sweating behemoth. Now, I have a good theory on what those actually were, and it might be a bit different than you're thinking, and maybe a lot more entertaining, but I'm not going to tell you, because I'm running out of time. So instead, I might have to do a lunch and learn event just to talk about their festivals. But I asked ChatGPT to imagine what this might look like, and it came up with this picture. And I am certain of one thing. It did not look anything like that. But can you imagine it? Can you imagine an entire community coming together, workers and families and children, laughing at a one-legged giraffe and a blood-sweating behemoth? I know what it is. I want to tell you. Fine, I'll tell you. True story. Hippopotamuses sweat a red liquid that dries dark brown. Go on Google, look up hippopotamus sweat, and it is red. They brought a hippopotamus into town. That is joy. That is community. That is people making the most of what they have and finding cause to celebrate and loving each other and being with each other. That is mill life at its best. Every step Victor Monaghan was taking was revolutionary, but one really stood out to me. Let's back up a little bit in time. There was a Greer boy named Tom Marchant. His brother, Dr. Marchant, started the Rexall drugstore, built it on the corner. Tom Marchant started working in Victor Mill as an office boy at age 16. He worked his way up the company until in 1922, they made him president of Victor Monaghan. They believed in giving people an opportunity path up. And this Greer boy, Tom Marchant, his first step he took as president was he bought a large tract of land at Cedar Mountain in North Carolina, just north of Caesar's Head. There was a beautiful forest and a large lake, and the company built a stone lodge and a boat dock and a swim pier and 14 cabins. And in 1922, they put in running water and electricity, indoor plumbing. This was a luxury retreat. And when the newspaper asked Tom Marchant about it, he said, "This is not for managers and supervisors. This is an employee camp." They called it Camp Reasonover. They called it the summer retreat of employees, and they meant it. More than 1,000 employees went up for the 4th of July, the very first year it opened up. They had literary clubs that went up for weekends. YMCA boys and YWCA girls went up. Church Sunday school classes. The Victor Improvement Club held their annual outing there every year. Victor Mill School held summer school classes at the camp. Greer Mill, this mill, shut down its entire operation for 3 days to take all of their employees up to the camp. And then they opened it up. Any employee could reserve a weekend, first come, first serve. And then Victor and Greer and Monaghan started giving week-long vacations to employees as 10-year anniversary gifts. Now, think about what that meant. A weaver or a spinner, someone making maybe $10 a week, spends 12 hours a day in a blistering hot, loud, lint-filled room, could take her family to a luxury mountain resort for a week with running water and indoor plumbing, which the mill houses did not have yet in 1922, and electric lights and a swimming lake, and still get their paycheck for a week. This was unheard of. A week-long vacation by itself was unheard of for farmers and mill workers in the 1920s. Most people worked 6 days a week, all week, every week, all year for their lives. A vacation at all was rare. A vacation at a luxurious mountain resort was something only wealthy people did, and a paid vacation was inconceivable. But not at Victor Monaghan. A spinner could take her children to the mountains, mountain air, and children swimming in a lake, and meals you don't have to cook. And the company president, Tom Marchant, and his wife, favorite activity was cooking the meals at the camp and serving their employees. In fact, when Tom retired, he full-time moved up to, he bought Caesar's Head, and full-time moved up there and ran the little resort that was at Caesar's Head. He loved it so much. And that spinner got nights without the sound of looms booming in their ears, and got mornings without the 4:30 a.m. whistle. You see, that is not just a company benefit or a perk. That is dignity. That is a company saying you are a human being and you deserve joy and beauty and rest. There was nothing like this anywhere else in the textile industry, maybe anywhere else in American industry, and it was immediately copied. By the end of the decade, there were 3 mill camps on Cedar Mountain. That's how serious Greer was about the Parker vision and how much impact we were having on the world around us. And that's what the Parker vision looked like at its absolute peak. Unlike the mills down the street, children were in great schools, communities with libraries and gymnasiums and Boy Scout groups and festivals and circuses and baseball games and week-long vacations at a mountain resort. This was Greer Mill Village in the 1920s. Greer had turned a problematic industry into a powerful strength, and that would play off in the next few years. In October of 1929, you know what happened.
Oh, yeah. I remember we had a hard time. Oh, yeah, we all three. Harry had never got married, my oldest son, and we all three. Neither one of us didn't have a job, and we couldn't get a job anywhere. And we wasn't the only people as others having time like that. Well, we'd have worked pretty good while. And there was a man, Frank Howard, was trading with him out there at the crossing, getting groceries and things from him before that happened. We always paid our debt. And was getting milk from another man. And so we got in debt with that, and they wouldn't cut us off. So when we went to work, we'd pay our bill that week and pay a little bit, add on to our bill. First thing you know, we'd come out on top. It wasn't near as hard as it seemed. But we thought we didn't want what we was going to do. We couldn't even find a job nowhere. Everybody else was laid off around. That was a bad time. We got in debt, but nobody didn't refuse us. And when we all went back to work, we soon paid it all. It just come around so good.
Did I mention I love this woman's spirit? Sorry, Victoria Bailey, I've got a new girl. Naomi and her family were really lucky. They got through it, they paid their debts, they survived, but not everyone did. Mills started shutting down around the upstate and around the country. Franklin Mill was the smallest of Greer's mills, and it ran out of money. The mill supervisor paid a payroll out of his life savings, and it wasn't enough. Think about that. But the mill went under. Franklin Mill shut down. The local mills that stayed open, including Victor and Greer mills, shortened their working hours. Each employee got fewer hours and lower pay. And as the Depression wore on, mills around the country were desperate to cut costs and stay afloat, and they came up with a solution they called stretch out. Instead of hiring more workers, they'd ask existing workers to do more. Run more machines, work faster, do the job of 2 people or 3 for the same pay or less. If you were a weaver running 8 looms, they'd ask you to run 12. If you're a spinner running 4 frames, they'd ask you to run 6. Same hours, more work, and often less pay. For workers who were already exhausted, already struggling to make ends meet, this was a breaking point. And even at Greer's mills, where conditions were better, the pressure to stretch out was intense.
Well, they call that stretching out. That stretching out. You just have to carry all they can put on you. I remember Tal Cordell, he was my second hand. He said, now, I says, Mr. Trammell said, they want me to stretch out. And he said, you're the best battery hand I got. He said, I was killing battery at that time. And he said, I want to put you on extra batteries. And said, now you don't have to work a bit harder than you're working right now. Said, just take your time. But I took my time. The only thing they'd spin, I just poke along. And he wouldn't fuss on me. He'd come over and hit me, but he wouldn't fuss. He knew I couldn't run all them batteries. They wanted to stretch out, and he didn't want to. Well, I just mean as they would.
Naomi was lucky. Her supervisor, Cal Cordell, protected her. He knew she couldn't run all those batteries, and he helped her instead of pushing her, but not every supervisor was like Cal. And not every worker had the option to refuse it. And if you couldn't keep up, you could be fired. And if you were fired, you could lose your house. And other mills spiraled down very fast. And in the Great Depression, there were plenty of people eager to take your position. They were ready to get rid of you for anything. And so in other parts of the country, this deadly combination of vile working conditions with economic depression and cutbacks led to extreme worker unrest. Stretch out was the last straw, and so in the fall of 1934, it all boiled over. The textile strike of 1934 has been forgotten, and it should not be. It was the largest strike that has ever happened in the United States of America. More than 400,000, close to 500,000 textile mill workers left their jobs in the United States, shut down the mills. In Greer, however, and in the mills that had followed the Victor Monaghan plan, conditions were better than in other places. Not perfect. We've seen the TB deaths and the injuries and the stretch out pressure, but genuinely better than almost anywhere else in the country. And many workers here felt loyal to their mills, and they didn't want to strike. But the Textile Workers Union in other cities, where conditions were worse and workers were desperate, needed the entire industry to shut down. A partial strike wasn't going to do it, and they did something that had been never heard of before. They came to Greer on Labor Day of 1934. Unionists from across the country gathered in buses and trucks and loaded them full of hundreds and hundreds of striking workers and drove up to Victor Mill at 3:45, the shift change. More than 500, mostly men, women, with some children, all carrying clubs, jumped out of the buses, and they started yelling at the mill workers coming in to join them on the strike. Don't go in and work. And the mill workers said, no, we're going to go to work anyway. And they called this group a flying squadron. And the flying squadron broke down Victor Mill's gates and went inside the mill and shut down the equipment, and the factory was shut down. That flying squadron loaded up in buses and came to Greer Mill and stormed the gates and came inside and shut down the mill. And then they went to Appalach, which had been bought by Victor Monaghan at this point and also didn't want to strike. And they did the same thing, shut down 3 mills in one day. These flying squadrons went on mill to mill across the upstate to any mill that refused to close. The governor of South Carolina dispatched the National Guard to Greer. Machine gun troops were dispatched. 3 machine gun nests were installed on top of Victor Mill. About 35 machine guns were put in a ring around Appalach Mill. Their stated goal was to ensure that these workers could get into the mill safely. The tensions between workers and strikers and mill supervisors and local police and National Guardsmen was absolutely intense. Naomi remembers it and talks about her son trying to get into work.
Yeah, I believe it come from, from Spartanburg or somewhere. They come from somewhere over here, a whole gang, And Spot come up there to go to work. He just blamed no thing. He just crawled through that crowd and got down, crawled through, and went on to work. I just remember Spot, that's my baby. crawling under that, crawling under those, right through them people and went right on to the mill and went to work.
So I think Spot got a little bit of her spirit. But at the Chicola Mill in Honyapath, not 35 miles from here, a similar scene played out. However, Chicola Mill was the opposite of Greer's mills. It was one of the hardest and most oppressive mills with the worst working conditions in the state. And at Honyapath, rather than bring in the National Guard, the mill supervisor, who was also the mayor of the town, had his police chief deputize 126 anti-union town people. Outside strikers came in to Chicola Mill in Honyapath. They confronted local workers. Strikebreakers with guns surrounded the mill. The mayor had a machine gun put on the roof. The flying squadron came in and was confronted, and strikebreakers threw sticks, and a tussle broke out, and the mayor told the machine gunner to open fire on the crowd. And he did. And when the smoke cleared, 7 men lay dead. The youngest was 26 years old. The oldest was 43 years old. All 7 had spent their entire lives in textile mills. All 7 had families waiting at home, except the 43-year-old whose daughter Ruth was standing beside him when he was shot, and she was 16 years old. 7 people dead in the street because the mill system was broken and no one could figure out or agree on how to fix it. In Honyapath, in part because the Parker system hadn't made it there yet. The Honyapath tragedy ended the strike nationally. The union called it off. Workers went back to the mills. Those who still had jobs, because if you participated in a flying squadron, you were out of work. Nationally, the strike was called a failure. It did do one thing that we still appreciate today. It created the national 40-hour work week. In South Carolina, it achieved something else. It created the strongest anti-union sentiment in the nation. A sentiment that would last for generations. When World War II broke out, Naomi Sizemore Trammell retired. She wasn't retirement age yet.
My baby boy was going in service. And he begged me to quit, said he didn't want to go out there be fighting for his country and me down here working myself to death, so I quit. He's 7 years old, and he wouldn't quit. And they put him out, looking at the gate out there. All he had to do was sit down. Well, Mr. Chumley wanted him to come back down there and work for him, and line shuttled, and he went back after he's 7 years old and worked some more. He loved to work in the mill. Well, we'd go early. I really don't know what time it was, but anyway, we'd have to go early. We worked 1 hour longer than people do now in the mill. I don't know why, but they did. And it paid off in $5 gold pieces. I told them I wished I had sense enough to say something there. Victor Mill, this old Victor Mill. That's where I went, when Panama died.
paid off in $5 gold pieces. She wished she had the sense to save some of them, but she didn't, of course. She spent them on food and clothes and raising her family and on living her life. And that's kind of the point. The gold is gone, but look at the memories she built. They lasted, and we're still enjoying them today. She told this story in 1980. She was 93 years old. She lived another 13 years to 106 years old and died in 1993. Her great-granddaughters called her Mimi, and one of them might be with us today. I haven't seen yet. Think about this. Naomi started working in Victor Mill 2 years after it opened. And she lived to see the mill shutting down and the buildings emptied and the industry disappearing. She saw the whole arc. And her story is the story of thousands, tens of thousands, who came to Greer looking for work and finding community, people who faced hardship and found joy, and people who lived in the shadow of brick buildings and made lives that they were proud of. And when Naomi looked back on it all, 80 years of millwork starting at age 10, she didn't talk about suffering. She talked about sliding down the chute on a bundle of cloth as a 22-year-old. That is resilience. That is the human capacity to find joy in hard places. And that's Greer. It's what I love about this town. So, if you have questions or want to hear more about the textile era or about Naomi's life, I'm going to have a very casual event at the museum Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Just let's talk if you want to talk some more. Share your stories or hear more of these stories. I'll tell you what she was talking about when she said spinning frames and batteries, and I'll even explain what they meant by a one-legged giraffe. In part 3 in June, we'll talk about what happened when the mills closed, when the jobs disappeared and Greer had to figure out who we were as a town if we weren't a mill town anymore, and how to take care of your people if you don't have that economy behind it. But today was our day to remember Naomi and Percy and Pegleg Willis, and a little boy who lost his finger, and all the tens of thousands of other people who joined them. Now, you're going to get to tour some of these incredible renovations and apartments in this historic mill complex when they have a grand opening in June. I can't wait for you to see the big 4-story incredible places there. And as you go through, remember that these were the people that sweated in here, in these rooms, and lived and died here because Greer is great because of them. And remember that we get to claim as a hometown that we showed the whole world how to take a messed up industry and turn it into our greatest strength. Thank you so much.